My notebook utilized data from inside Airbnb.com, and I looked at the data from the Sydney portion of the site. So the things I was looking for mainly were the density of Airbnbs in Sydney, if the distance from the CBD through checking their distance from Central Station matters to the place's price or popularity, the nature of pricing of Airbnbs, how dominant some users are on the platform, and where it would be wise to invest in. So you might be asking, why am I using the distance to Central as a measure? Usually when I'm searching for a lodging, I look for a place that allows me to easily travel around to all the major attractions, and Central being, well, the central place for all Sydney transport, I thought it'd be a good indicator for places around Sydney. So we're also going to only be looking at data that can currently be booked right now and has been reviewed in the past year. So the map. Around the coast, the area is absolutely cluttered with listings, making up a majority of the actual coastline, slowly weaning out as we get farther away from the CBD. This helps us visualize the situation, but let's get some hard numbers in first. The dominance of listings in the CBD is really noticeable. Just between 0 to 10 kilometers, there's almost double the amount of than, say, like 10 to 60 kilometers, which is kind of nuts. So now that we know the amount of Airbnbs around Sydney, does the location of the Airbnb actually correlate to the price per night and popularity of the Airbnb? So this is a bubble graph with the distance from Central as the X, the price per night as the Y, and the Z value being the reviews per month. So between 0 to 30 kilometers and $0 to $500, it's really hard to actually see any data due to the amount of listings at those price points, which really tells me how absolutely cutthroat the pricing model is for listings in the city. Despite this, we can clearly see that some people really like to ball out and purchase really expensive Airbnbs in the city, with them consistently getting reviews. While 30 kilometers out, we can actually see there's a lack of super expensive places while also getting consistent monthly reviews, which tells me that some people really like going out to, not city-based Airbnbs. So get an easier to digest graph with the average price of an Airbnb according to the distance from Central. So there's no consistent pattern to the price according to the distance, which tells me that the actual Airbnb matters more than a few kilometers to the station regarding the price. However, it seems like the popularity is quite reliant to the distance either to the station or from the station. Around 0 to 3 kilometers, Airbnbs generally get 1.5 to 2 times the amount of reviews than places between 5 to 30 kilometers. However, as we get farther out, despite a lower amount of listings, the popularity increases, telling me that people actually prefer being away from the city life more than having a place close to the city. So this graph is telling the most. This graph answers my questions on how some hosts totally dominate the market. This probably has the easiest to tell trend out of all my graphs. So generally put, hosts that own properties close to the CBD own quite a large amount of property in comparison to the hosts that are in the suburbs and rural areas. You can make your own opinion about the housing and Airbnb market just by looking at this graph. Now we're going to look at what suburbs are the most popular. So we're going to be taking the CBD neighborhood out, as we already know that will be the one that will dominate the results. So generally, places close to the CBD are quite popular, such as Randwick and Waverley, or places like Manly or Botany Bay with noticeable attractions being also quite popular. There are some disparities since some places will have more listings than others, so let's look at the average amount of reviews and monthly reviews to get a better idea. With the disparity of listings removed, we can see that the consistently good investments are places with a high number of reviews and monthly reviews, as those will bring in money for quite a long time. So places such as Leichhardt and Marrickville, while it might be more difficult to bring in money with places such as Bankstown or Camden. I say Camden. And yeah, that's it. Yep.
Okay, so you've got 30 seconds if you want to say something else.
I don't really have anything else to say.
Okay, cool. So there were a bunch of interesting things that I think came up here. I think the sort of, you've created a distance from Central Station value, which I think has been a really useful lens to look at this data, because lots of people have looked at it in the past, but you've got this new way of looking at it in terms of distance. I think it would be interesting to look at what is sort of out there in terms of the geography of, or the sort of topography of what the city's doing in those bands. So can you just skip back to the distance from the CBD graphs that you had?
All the way. Would it be the price or the popularity?
Let's say popularity, doesn't really matter which one's which. So you see that drop off, and that's probably a pretty standard drop off, like, because it's walking distance measurements, but then it gets really erratic out towards the end. And I wonder if that is because the numbers drop off and so the averages do weird stuff, or whether you start to see something like, you see when it climbs at the end, is that because you suddenly get into the Blue Mountains or something like that? You know, like, so if you had a map of Sydney with some circles on it that show you what your 10-kilometer bands are and how they match up to that, what happens in those 10-kilometer bands, so that you have an idea of what it is, what does it mean to be 60 kilometers away from the CBD. The other thing that's interesting about that is you're only dealing, because it's a coastal city, you're only dealing with half the space.
Yeah.
And do things show up? So can you get to Wollongong in 60 kilometers? That kind of thing. I'm pretty sure you can't get to Newcastle, but does the sort of distribution of the city influence this data? And I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. I think the story you had was good. You were kind of running through it as a story. Like, let's look at this, let's look at this. Oh, this is interesting. Let's look at that. That was really good. Practically like a technical thing on your bubble graph with the what was it? That one. It would be, there's two things you could do there to make it a bit more readable. You can either change the alpha of the bubbles so that they're transparent, so when they're overlaid on each other. The other thing that might be worth looking at is whether you have a log y-axis, because you've got so much crammed down the bottom and then so little kind of up at the top, that it would be interesting to spread that out so that you see whether the, is it worth putting a log axis on that. But overall, very interesting. I mean, it's a data set that's been kind of wrung out over and over again, so it's nice to see a new perspective on it.